Let's talk about some tennis flags.
Not
This is all you. I don't know anything about this except for the articles you sent me, so go ahead, take it away.
Okay, so first and foremost, I need to start out, and this is not sponsored by Netflix, but I wish it was. So in our last sports report, we talked about Netflix picking up more sports content and things like that. And Kelsey and I basically shit on the entire thing, and we were like, this is going to be stupid. Well, I think we were wrong because
Ooh.
I told Kelsey over the weekend or whenever it was that last week, I believe, Derek and I watched Breakpoint on Netflix, and it's just like a mini docuseries. It's from the same people who did Formula One. That absolutely blew up, and then they're actually doing a golf one too. And it's just like 5 episodes on the Australian, or not the Australian Open, but that's one of the places it starts. But it's all the up and coming talent in tennis, obviously from internationally, it's everybody. And it was so good. 5 episodes. The next 5 come out in June. They cover like the first like circuit or whatever that they go through. I'm still learning the technicalities of tennis. But it started off with the Australian Open, which just happened we're in February now. So it just happened in January. So it was really cool to follow. And then it ended at the French Open. And then I'm assuming the next half will be like Wimbledon, US Open. And it also had like smaller tournaments in there as well. But for the most part, you follow all of the younger players. Even though Nadal has like such a huge focal point in it, he's not a main character, but you would think he was a main character because like every single men's tennis player has to face him at one point, whether it's in the semifinals, finals for the most part. So it was just like truly the most fascinating show. I absolutely loved it. It covers like men's tennis, women's tennis. It even has like greats come in and like talk about the world of tennis and like their experience. It's just done so well, and I was absolutely fascinated by the sport as a whole. But the story we're talking about today is what happened at the Australian Open. I guess I don't know if people know this, but international sports like banned Russian flags and Russian flags as well.
Belarus.
Belarus.
Jesus.
Whatever.
Wow.
Just
proceed.
Tired.
Nope.
Just edit out. So I'm just gonna start over.
That's fair.
So I don't know if most people know this, but when it comes to international sports, after Russia invaded Ukraine, they all kind of came together and they agreed to ban Russian flags and Belarus flags. Also last year, Wimbledon didn't allow any Russian players, and like basically how the scoring, like their score, like what if they won, like it didn't affect their ranking at all, essentially. So there's like a lot of stories coming out, like if Wimbledon is going to let them compete or compete for anything, or what kind of the deal is going to be. But at the Australian Open, they banned Russian and Belarus flags. So typically when you see a match, they have their country's flag next to it in the score box. And for any Russian, it was just black. And then same with any Belarus too. And there's a lot of pushback because a lot of the players, and mostly Ukraine players, said like they should not be allowed to play at all. Essentially what happened is in the women's final this year, there was a Russian player against a Russian player who lives in, what's it called? What country is it called?
I'm like, no, I can't find it.
Kazakhstan.
Okay.
Right?
Kazakhstan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just going to start that part. But so what happened at the Australian Open finals for women was there was a Russian player against a born Russian who moved to Kazakhstan like 5 years ago and was started representing them because of she received better financial backing. So essentially it was two Russian players playing against each other. So there was just a lot of pushback there. There was also some controversy that happened in the stands because the Australian Open did not allow like any fans to bring like Russian flags or Belarus flags or anything. And while a Ukraine player was playing, there was a Russian flag that a fan stuck like in the stands essentially. So the fans were taken care of and things like that. But for the most part, I know there was also some fans who brought Russian flags for the players to sign as well. So they were like allowed in the facility, but not allowed to be like waved around essentially, especially when a Ukrainian player is playing. So I just thought this was interesting because I think like for us, we get so sucked into American sports and that's what we primarily talk about. I mean, we've talked about the NFL for how many months now? And you don't think about on an international stage, kind of the implications of a country going to war with another country. And there's always the argument, like, it's not the player's fault, so, like, they should be able to play. But then also, I feel like from, like, an sports organization standpoint, like sports are so important to all countries and like those countries kind of deserve to be punished. So yeah, that's kind of like the debate that's going on of whether Russian and Belarus players will be allowed to continue to play throughout the rest of the circuit and like Grand Slams, specifically Wimbledon.
I've been racking my little brain about this since we talked about it the other day. I don't know. Like, at first thought, I'm like, yeah, they shouldn't be allowed to play. Because, you know, they're representing a country who's doing awful things to another country, more so than we've ever probably seen, at least in our lifetime, obviously. So yeah, you're like, that country should not be represented at anything. And I know at the Olympics, I don't know what they say, but the Russians been having some doping problems, so they haven't been represented in a long time. But I don't know. I've always felt like, yeah, they're not representing, but they're still there. Like, they're still there. We all know they're still from Russia. But it's obviously not an individual athlete's fault that their country is just happening to invade another country. So I don't know. Like, it sucks that they have to be made like this. They have to make a point out of them. But I think you have to kind of make a point out of them because you can't just stand for what's happening over there. I don't know. I really feel like it's not my place to even know or even have an opinion, to be honest.
No, and I don't think it is. Like, we're Americans. Like, we shouldn't have necessarily have an opinion on this. I think it's important for us to bring stories like this to light, which is exactly what we're doing. I just think that if I was in their shoes and we were at war with the country, honestly, on either end, like, I wouldn't, like, I would support, like, either the other country's players, like, not playing, or if we were doing something horrific, I would be like, no, we don't deserve to play.
Yeah, I read this article, and there was a Belarus player. She said that she would prefer that politics and sports remain separate, but understands the decision by Tennis Australia. And it was just, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of weird because, you know, sports and politics play such a big part in our lives. And, you know, these huge international competitions have to do with countries. You know, countries are political. Like, it can't completely stay separate. Maybe your country just shouldn't invade other countries. I don't know. Who am I to say? But I thought it was a weird quote, for sure. I was like, that doesn't seem very, like, I don't know. Doesn't seem nice. Like, I probably would have been like, yeah, we shouldn't. But I don't know what these people can say because I don't know what their country does to them if they speak out against shit either. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like they're put in a tough spot. And I think that, like you said, and we've learned, like, sports has been political since sports was adopted, like, since the beginning of time. So it's really hard to say something like sports and politics should be separate because it's just not the case. Especially, like, in a sport that's so international like tennis. And I think that I definitely agree with, like, there should be no representation of Russia whatsoever. I do understand, like, it's hard on the players and they probably can't say much either. But I think I'm pro, like, not having them there, especially, like, just like using the example of what happened with, like, a Ukrainian player was playing and there's a Russian flag flying in the stands. Like, that, oh my.
It's weird shit.
I would be so fucking mad. Like, I would be livid and upset and crying. And a lot of what they talk about in Breakpoint is that tennis is such an individual sport. And it's such a mental game. Like, one set, you can be crushing it, and then the next one, like, you fall apart. So I think, like, these players, I'm sure, are so focused on, like, the game and all this stuff, but they have to be thinking about what's going on in their country and their family members and their loved ones. And, like, if I was a Ukraine player, I'm sure there's so much going on in their head. And if you just turn to the stands and see that, like, that's unfair.
That's true. That would definitely mess your shit up, for sure.
Yes, 100%. So, I don't know. I'm interested to see the story developing. I know the IOC has already come out and said that for the 2024 Olympics that Russian and Belarus players can play, but they're still trying to figure out if it's going to be like no flag, neutral flag, what kind of the plan is. But I'm interested to see, like, as the tennis season continues and Wimbledon and all that, what they decide. But I think that the Australian Open women's final brought to light, like, there's a Russian player versus essentially a Russian player. And is that fair? I don't think so, but
no. It's interesting. They've already made the call that they're going to be allowed to be there. Just considering everything that's happened the past year, and we don't know what's going to continue to happen. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
I'm almost positive that's what that one article said, and I think the individual sports, like, I think tennis was still deciding, but I think, like, widely spread, they essentially said it was okay. The IOC.
Okay. Stay tuned. I'm sure we'll talk about it some more.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yikes.
It's very intense. And again, I really, really recommend the show Breakpoint. Like, it was, if you're trying to, even if you're not interested in sports or tennis or anything, like, it was just so fascinating. And I think it's cool to see a lot of the younger players kind of come for this reckoning of tennis, because there's, like, Serena Williams retired, Roger Federer. Really the only two, like, dominant ones left are Djokovic and Nadal, which Djokovic won his 10th Australian Open and I think, like, his 22nd Grand Slam, which is absolutely
casual.
Which is just a storyline in itself because he hasn't competed because he refused to get the COVID vaccine. So I think it's a really cool time for people to get into the sport of tennis because it's just, like, burst wide open, and they call them, like, the Americans, which is really cool. So there's, like, a lot of young American male and female tennis players that are up and coming. There's, like, Italian, Greek, Spain, like, there's so many different influences, and the players are all just really have fascinating stories. And the sport itself, I didn't realize how like intense it was, but it totally makes sense because you're out there by yourself.
Yeah, it's like I kind of can get behind it because not really. I guess golf's pretty individual, which I've played, but you're still, I guess, next to people and playing with people. Whereas tennis, you're just sitting there on your own side, like hoping you don't fuck up almost. But
yeah, and it's just I didn't even understand like a lot of the nuances of tennis. Like they literally like the two opponents like walk out together, like obviously not next to each other, but like pretty much back to back. They're like in the back, like getting ready to go out there, like warm ups, like doing the jumping jacks and whatever together. And it was just so fascinating to me because I'm so used to sports where like the two teams like do not associate before the game, and like they come out of separate tunnels, and like it's just so separate where like you're really like put in the face of your opponent. And it's such like, I remember I forget which player it was, but he was facing Nadal, and I was like, that has to be so intimidating. And it was a young player, and Nadal's just like doing his little running like pre-warm-up thing, and the guy's just like standing there like trying not to look at him. And I was like,
yeah, what do you do?
yeah, like I would be psyched. Like you have to have such a strong mental state and mindset, and it was very different than like any sports that I have followed or I'm a fan of. And I'm like super excited to now keep up to date with it. And I'm ready for the next 5 episodes in June.
Okay, I'll check it out. You've convinced me.
You should. It's so good. And like the rankings like change, especially for women's right now. It just changes all the time. And there's so many beautiful stories within the larger sport of tennis. And the episode that focused on women's tennis players, I literally cried because it was just like beautifully done.